The subcommittee will come to order, and good afternoon to everybody. The global incidence of autism is steadily increasing. About 1 in 68 children have been identified with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, according to estimates from the Centers for Disease Control, Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. ASD is reported to occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, but is almost 5 times more common among boys, 1 in 42, than among girls, 1 in 189. Studies in Asia, Europe, and North America have identified individuals with ASD with an average of about 1% of the population. The prevalence of autism in Africa is unknown, but there is no reason to believe that it's any different, it might even be worse, than other parts of the world. I note parenthetically that Greg Simpkins and I were in Nigeria twice in the last year, but 10 years ago for a conference on combating sex trafficking, and something I've worked on for many, many years. And after the speech, a man came up and said, "What are you doing about autism in Nigeria?" And I said, "Well, nothing." We've become good friends ever since. He has worked with the Autism Society of America ever since to grow, and he said there's at least 1 million children in Nigeria who are dealing, it's probably closer to 2, and not dealing with it well because they are so resource lacking. A new study recently found that each case of autism costs $2.4 million over a lifetime, including the expense of special education and lost productivity for their parents. Meanwhile, 85% of autistic adults are jobless or underemployed. It is therefore imperative that people with ASD are empowered to be self-sufficient so that they can not only earn money to meet their own needs, but they also can utilize their very special talents that they possess to contribute to society at large. This hearing will examine some innovative strategies to achieve that important goal. SAP, a global software company, is working to rectify this problem. SAP partnered with Thorkel Sohn, CEO and founder of Special Listern, to develop the highly successful SAP Autism at Work program. Mr. Sohn, whose 17-year-old son Lars is autistic, realized that while those with autism might lack the social skills recruiters are looking for, they possess many attributes high on their radar as well: intelligence and memory, the ability to see patterns and attention to detail, especially on repetitive tasks. He reasoned that it would be phenomenal if we could use skills like that we see among the autism community in software testing, data analysis, and quality controls. He says that there is no reason why we should leave these people unemployed when they have so much talent and there are so many vacant jobs in the high-tech sector. SAP and Mr. Sohn will provide further details of their extraordinary program here today. Teresa Hussman of Autism Society put it, I think, very well. In work, at school, and in the community, people with autism are often faced with segregation, low expectations, impoverished conditions, and denial of opportunity that a society committed to civil rights should find unacceptable. Today, if you are an adult living with autism, you will likely be unemployed or vastly underemployed, living well below the poverty line, and denied access to affordable housing and so much more. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Ron Susskind will testify in part about the success with his affinity approach. And he points out in his testimony that for every visible deficit, there is an equal and opposing strength. This population is just like the rest of us, only less so and more so. The question increasingly is not if these more so qualities exist, but where. Autism used to be described as a disorder characterized by delays or abnormal functioning to the age of 3, sometimes in social interaction, communication, or restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. More recently, behavioral scientists describe a range of such behavior, now referred to as autism spectrum disorder, which includes more high-functioning version known as Asperger's syndrome. It is medically possible to diagnose somebody with ASD as early as 18 months or even younger, and a reliable diagnosis can be made by the age of 2. However, symptoms might not present themselves until later in life. Those with some form of autism may never be diagnosed at all. This has led to a debate over famous people, productive people, often considered geniuses, who appear to have symptoms of autism, especially Asperger's syndrome. In April 3rd, 2003 issue of the New Scientist magazine, writer Hazel Muir revealed the debate over whether geniuses like Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton had Asperger syndrome. Simon Baron Cohen, an autism expert based at Cambridge and Oxford University, mathematician Ian James speculated that Newton, the noted English physicist and mathematician, exhibited Asperger traits such as hardly speaking, forgetting to eat, and giving scheduled lectures even to an empty room. Einstein, the German physicist, who was said to have obsessively repeated sentences until he was 7 years old and was notoriously confusing as a lecturer. Both were highly productive scientists, perhaps because of the kind of focus ASD produces rather than in spite of it. In February 2nd of 2005, a report by Sue Herrera of CNBC presented an interview with 2002 Nobel laureate Vernon L. Smith, in which he spoke of the way in which autism has allowed him to excel. I can switch out and go into a concentrated mode, and the world is completely shut out, Smith is quoted as saying. If I'm writing something, nothing else exists. During the interview, Smith, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing the field of experimental economics, admitted that he sometimes is not there in social situations. He said that teaching had forced him to become more social. It was only because he was talking about issues on which he was already focused. I raise the issue of intelligence and functionality because we too often see people with ASD as victims who must be cared for when the focus their condition produces may only allow them to highly successful in certain endeavors. When we begin to look at people with ASD in this light, we can better see how they can be enabled to contribute to society. It just requires understanding of their potential as well as their limitations. Many fields involving mathematics and science would allow for the intense focus exhibited by people with ASD. Think of the fields of analysis, intelligence, actuary science, and the positions requiring what we commonly call numbers crunching. The ability to analyze data and see patterns most people would not recognize would be an invaluable analytical in those jobs. As Nobel laureate Smith, Vernon Smith continued, his disconnection from social relationships enabled him to think outside the box, as it were, without concern for violating social norms. He found this condition to be an advantage in enabling greater creativity. In our increasingly technical world, people with ASD actually are becoming more valuable if we can help them overcome social disconnection and allow them to find fields in which they can bring where their disability is actually an advantage. We hope today's hearing can be instructive in at least initiating a change in perspective on what people with ASD can do to help themselves and make a contribution to society as a whole. We must not continue to waste the talents of people who could make their lives and ours much better. Finally, I'd like to welcome an amazing group of individuals who have and are making an historic difference in the lives of people on the spectrum. As Michael Rosenoff of Autism Speaks puts it in his testimony, our mission at Autism Speaks is to change the future for all who struggle with autism spectrum disorders. Each of you on this expert panel are already doing that, and I thank you as chair of this subcommittee. I'd like to now yield to my friend and colleague, Chairman of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection and Security and Technologies of the Committee on Homeland Security, Pat Meehan from Pennsylvania.
Let me thank you, Chairman, and let me thank you for your long association and leadership with this issue. And I think you have so importantly pointed out that this is not just a growing issue here at home, but an issue with global implications. And while we focus largely on the impact that this has on families and children here in the United States, we appreciate that as we continue to struggle for a better understanding of what may cause autism, a better understanding of what we may be able to do to more effectively assist and treat those who are on the spectrum in different capacities. An appreciation for what may be happening in other parts of the world will be important and vital to our understanding of the kind of information that will help us perhaps make progress towards inroads towards cures and otherwise. and just as importantly, the attention you are paying to things that are happening around the world, but here in this country, with with what is becoming more and more prevalent. And this is why I'm so grateful and intrigued by today's hearing. As we see this dramatic growth in diagnoses and in the number, particularly of boys that are associated with this, by its very implication, we're seeing more and more who are aging out of the support services that have been made available by virtue of the state's responsibility to provide an appropriate education. And we're finding parents who are now dealing with children who are now young adults and beginning to try to transition into a life of adulthood, oftentimes parents in the later part of their lives dealing with huge new struggles. But one of the bright spots has been that with the progress that has been made, we've been able to see the capacity for those with autism at various parts on the spectrum to be able to transition effectively into meaningful lives, but up to and including meaningful contributions in the workforce, and as you will point out, in some cases, remarkably superior capacities to contribute to the workforce with special skills that they bring. And I know we'll be exploring more of that with the testimony, and I'm going to be looking forward to hearing not only the experiences, the positives and the challenges, as we look, I think, to continue to address this growing segment, which include those who are aging out of the support systems and will now be looking to begin a life of independence. We need to be able to look for every opportunity we can to usher that support along. And I thank you for your foresight. I thank you for your leadership on this issue here in the Congress and on behalf of all of those with autism across our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll now welcome, first of all, wait till Pat gets. Chair recognizes Mr. Bean.
We're now doing role reversal, Mr. Chairman. I see you from up here and then and down here, but it's a real. I'm very proud to have the opportunity to be here with you today. And I want to thank you for not only this occasion but holding a hearing on this vitally important topic. I'm grateful for your leadership on the autism issues, and I'm honored to have a chance to highlight some of the great work that's being done by a company that is a global company, but headquartered in my district in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. And it is my privilege to introduce Mr. Jose Velasco. He is the Vice President of Project Management and the head of the Autism at Work initiative at SAP Incorporated. Mr. Velasco has held a number of positions since joining SAP in 1998, and before that founded a software company and consulted for Fortune 500 companies. He's also the proud father of 2 young adults in the autism spectrum. Mr. Velasco is the Vice President and head of Autism at Work initiative at SAP. And I am delighted to have the honor of introducing him to the members of the committee.
Ms. Velasco, if you could please take your seat, and Pat, just sit there 1 second, and then I'll go through the others. Have a seat, please. Next on the list is Mr. Thorkel Sohn, is the founder and chairman of the Special Listern and Specialist People Foundation, with the goal to enable 1 million jobs for people with autism and similar challenges. He first became involved in autism when his son Lars was diagnosed with infantile autism in 1999. He became active in Danish Autism Society, eventually leaving his position as an IT startup company to establish Special Listern in 2003. Mr. Sohn is now based in the United States, where he is driving the expansion of that Special Listern model with a goal, as I said in my opening, of enabling 100,000 jobs for people with autism and similar challenges. We'll then hear from Ms. Teresa Hussman, who is a board member of the Autism Society and a director of the Hussman Institute for Autism, a research institute established to improve the lives of individuals with autism and their families. She is also the project coordinator for the Hussman Foundation. In this capacity, she conducts the review and processing of grants, coordinates and attends status meetings on existing and potential grants and partnerships, and represents the foundation at charitable events. Ms. Hussman is a parent of a young adult son with autism, and in 2013 was appointed as an advisory member of the Howard County Transition Council for Youth and Disabilities. We will then hear from Mr. Michael Rosenoff, who is a member of the Autism Speaks science team and manages the organization's epidemiology and public health research projects focused on understanding the prevalence and the causes of autism. Since joining the organization in 2007, he has been part of the development team of the Global Autism Public Health Initiative, an effort designed to increase awareness of autism and improve access to services through the collection of public health data and training of providers worldwide. Mr. Rosenoff is also a member of Autism Speaks Grants Division, helping oversee the organization's grant-giving process for autism research, which has committed over $200 million to date. We'll then hear from Mr. Ron Suskind, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist and best-selling author. He was the senior national affairs writer for the Wall Street Journal from 1993 to 2000 and has published many books, and most recently his memoir, Life Animated, A Story of Sidekicks, Heroes, and Autism, which explores his own son's Owen's struggle with autism. Since the book's publication, Ron has traveled the country as an autism expert, speaking to audiences at the United Nations, the NIH, University of Chicago, and Harvard, and of course, the House of Representatives. He is currently senior fellow at the Center for Ethics at Harvard University. So if all of you could please come in and provide your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I submitted a copy of my written statement for the record, if you allow me to summarize it.
Sure. Without objection, all of your longer versions and any materials you'd like to be made a part of the record is so ordered.
Thank you. SAP would like to thank you for your leadership and for providing us the opportunity to share our views on autism and its global impact. My name is Jose Velasco. I am head of the SAP Autism at Work initiative in the United States. As you may know, SAP is a global leader in enterprise software with more than 67,000 employees, providing business solutions for over 250,000 customers in more than 130 countries. SAP systems are at the core of large parts of global IT, powering more than 65% of the transactions that make up the world's gross domestic products, or GDP. With a current estimate of 1 in 68 children affected by autism, an estimated underemployment and unemployment rate of 70 to 80%, and an annual cost to the United States in the range of 175 billion to 196 billion, SAP recognizes the magnitude, the emotional and financial impact that autism has in communities around the world. SAP also recognizes that there is a real opportunity to leverage the skills of people with autism in the workplace, specifically based on our experience in the technology sector, where some of the skills traditionally found in people with autism have a strong affinity with the capabilities needed by companies in our line of business. SAP also believes that the cornerstone element of innovation is the diversity and perspectives of those who participate in the creative process, including those with autism. In support of these views and in support of SAP's mission to help run the world better and improve people's lives, SAP, in partnership with Specialist Sterne, announced in May of 2013 the inception of the Global Autism at Work initiative, a unique effort to train people with autism worldwide with the purpose of providing meaningful and rewarding employment opportunities in core functions of our company, such as software development, software testing, customer support, and internal IT functions at SAP, among other positions. SAP's objective is that by the year 2020, 1% of its workforce will be represented by people in the autism spectrum, roughly 650 positions based on SAP's current global workforce of about 65,000 employees. Since this announcement, SAP has successfully implemented pilot programs in India, Ireland, Germany, Canada, and the United States, and is in the early planning stages of a pilot program in Brazil. SAP is also evaluating the implementation of pilot programs in other locations that may include China, France, Bulgaria, and South Africa. It is expected that by the at the end of 2014, SAP will count with approximately 55 colleagues with autism worldwide, and that by the end of 2015, the number will increase to more than 150. SAP has executed this vision globally with Specialist Erne and locally in the United States in cooperation with the Department of Rehabilitation of the State of California, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation of the State of Pennsylvania, and their service providers, Expandability and the ARC of Philadelphia. SAP has leveraged the strength of these partners to create new, simple, and sustainable process to accommodate our new colleagues. Processes such as non-traditional interviewing methods, pre-employment training, on-the-job coaching, and SAP personnel autism awareness training. Chairman Smith, the ultimate goal of diversity and the Autism at Work program is to provide and attract the best possible talent to our company, no matter what this talent looks like. We hire our new colleagues in spite of autism, as in spite of the challenges associated with this condition, these new colleagues have arrived at our door displaying resiliency, loyalty, dedication, and most importantly, a burning desire to work. We also hire people because of autism, as we are able to leverage the innate abilities oftentimes associated with the condition, including a gifted memory, a natural ability to recognize patterns and deviations in systems or data, which is very much in scope for us, and the ability to concentrate and persevere on tasks over a long period of time while remaining attentive to the smallest details. We have a long journey ahead of us with many things to discover, but we feel confident that we will, with the help of our partners, we will be able to continue to leverage the talents and skills of people with autism. We also feel very confident that soon more companies will have similar programs. SAP has been approached by more than 15 companies interested in understanding how our program was conceptualized and implemented. On behalf of SAP's Diversity and Inclusion Office, our new colleagues with autism mainly, and on behalf of the SAP employees who have made this initiative possible, we would like to thank you once more for this opportunity to share our experience. On behalf of the many families like mine who are touched by autism, thank you for your leadership and for your attention. I would be more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Mr. Velasco, thank you very much for your testimony and your leadership. I'd like to now yield to Mr. Sung. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Smith, for your leadership in this area, and thanks for the opportunity to address the global autism challenge here. I prepared a written statement which I'll ask to be entered
Yes,
to the
without
record.
objection, it is part of the record.
Thank you. So my message here today is that if we take a global job approach to the autism challenge, we can actually unlock a lot of hope, action, and impact in the US and globally. And we can create value for all the stakeholders in our society. My background is as a father of a young man with autism, as a social entrepreneur, as a businessman, and as a former chair of a local branch of Autism Denmark. I founded Specialisterne 10 years ago to train, assess, educate, and employ people with autism. And I'm happy to be an American resident now since August last year to lead the activities in the US. Parents whose sons or daughters have autism are, in my eyes, part of a global family that goes beyond borders, culture, economy, tradition. We share very much the same destiny. We've gone through the same emotions. And I've been contacted by parents of kids with autism in about 90 countries. And they've asked me to help making a change in their nation. And when parents with autism make contact with me, I cannot say no. I can say, be patient. We'll find a way. We'll get there. Many families are stuck in their own struggle of concern, despair, and fights. All are driven of the fear of what will happen to our loved ones when we are not there to fight their battles anymore. As long as the parents are able, we'll fight their battles, but at some point of time, we won't have these resources anymore. But what if we can give these families a hope that there will be jobs? There will be employers who will respect that people are different and appreciate that talent comes in different shapes. What if employers are willing to accommodate a working environment where the individual can excel even if they have autism? Well, today you heard from a great example of such an employer, SAP. So I think the question is, how can we as a global family, as global stakeholders, help companies like SAP who want to get access to talented people with autism around the world? I founded Specialisten as a social enterprise to solve a social challenge with a business model. We now have 10 years experience in unfolding talent among people with autism and put these talents to good use when we can match the individual's comfort zone with the work zone. The goal is 1 million jobs, 100,000 in the US, another 100,000 in Africa. What we learn in the US through partnerships with businesses, with NGOs that work with people with disabilities, we need to bring to Africa and other continents. In Africa, in particular, we need to empower the families. We need to give them hope. We need to help go from hope to action through social entrepreneurship and to provide a model for impact where big business, academia, governments, and the education system can work together to create jobs. I see social entrepreneurship as a great tool and a great resource in Africa. There are 350 social entrepreneurs supported by Ashoka, which select social entrepreneurs with a potential to change the local environment in which they act. I'm an Ashoka Fellow. I'm also a SWAP Foundation social entrepreneur. They have conferences on Africa. They're connected with the World Economic Forum, and that's when we can connect these stakeholders that we can help release the parent power, turn that into social entrepreneurship that can work with big business and with governments and other stakeholders. Just imagine if we can invest in creating jobs for people with autism and assist the education system to identify and support differently abled students with autism in the US, in Africa, and globally. With a job creation approach to the global autism challenge, we can really make results that will make a lot of sense from a family, a health, a human rights, a business, and a financial perspective. Thanks again for your leadership in this role, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So thank you very much for your leadership as a pioneer, and that vision of 1 million jobs, 100,000 US couldn't come at a better time. Like Victor Hugo once said, nothing as compelling as an idea whose time has come. So thank you for your pioneering work. Ms. Hussman.
Congressman Smith and members of the committee, it's my pleasure and honor to be asked to appear before you and to talk about what we believe is the most critical and important need for over 3 million individuals who have an autism diagnosis. My name is Teresa Hussman, and I am a dedicated volunteer of the Autism Society of America, the nation's oldest and largest grassroots national autism organization. Our organization's president, Scott Badish, is currently hosting 1,000 people at our national conference in Indianapolis, and he asked me to come and present the testimony for him. With over 105 affiliates serving close to 1 million people each year, the Autism Society National Network works each day to improve the quality of life for all who live with autism. We do this in ways that are outcome-based, and I am proud that we are fully inclusive, having individuals with autism, family members, professionals, and community leaders in all parts of our governing and advisory boards. In addition to serving with the Autism Society of America, my husband John and I are the very proud parents of 4 young adults, one of whom has autism. Over the past decade, we have been among the largest private funders of autism research and recently established the Hussman Institute for Autism, a research institute founded on the principles that people with autism have far more competence than they may be able to demonstrate or that society allows them to achieve. I want to commend this committee and especially the leadership of Chris Smith for holding this important hearing. A few years ago, there was a video that went viral of a young man with autism named Jason McElwin. They called him J-Mac. He spent his high school years as a manager of his high school basketball team because he had a passion for the game. In his senior year, he was allowed to play 4 minutes and 19 seconds of a game. During that time, he made 7 baskets, 6 points of 7 baskets, 6 points of which were 3-pointers. While millions who watched celebrated that brief moment of opportunity, those of us who advocate for our loved ones with autism also asked, why wasn't he on the court the whole year? In school, at work, and in the community, people with autism are often faced with segregation, low expectations, impoverished conditions, and denial of opportunities that a society committed to civil rights should find completely unacceptable. Today, if you're an adult living with autism, you'll likely be unemployed or vastly underemployed, living well below the poverty line, and denied access to affordable housing, and much more. The most agreed upon rate of unemployment or underemployment among adults with autism is close to 70%. Think for a minute if any other group of individuals in our nation had such a high rate of unemployment. While companies are now starting to move in the right direction to address this dire statistic, including SAP, AMC Theaters, Walgreens, UPS, EMS Insurance, and many more, the reality is that behind each of these statistics is the lack of our nation's attention to fully integrate those living with autism into our mainstream society. Though universal access is often expected of our buildings and of our stairways, our society has yet to build that universal access into our schools, our curricula, our workplaces, our hearts, and our minds. A person living with autism has every right to be included in the mainstream of society, but it isn't occurring. Ask almost any parent of a school-age child with autism about their struggles with public school systems, and they will tell you story after story about lack of inclusion, denial of rights, and inadequate educational supports. You will hear about schools that underestimate children with autism and limit their educational opportunities. While we watch the number of children diagnosed on the autism spectrum increase, we fail to prepare these educators, paraprofessionals, and school administrators to properly support those students with autism. Yet every one of them will come across a child on the spectrum every day. Many school districts and superintendents fight against laws that would regulate the harmful impact of restraints and seclusion on innocent students with autism, even though research has demonstrated that these approaches are entirely unnecessary when people with autism are provided with appropriate, positive behavioral support. Many colleges define their commitment to educational opportunities for a person with a disability as being little more than some extra time to take a test. It is rare to find a school leader who is held accountable by his or her governing board for the success of students with disability. Autism creates enough barriers for individuals to demonstrate their ability and to engage with their community. We need our nation to lower those barriers in every aspect of life, not to build them higher. With respect to employment, too many public schools and colleges are not addressing the educational and job skill development needs of our students with autism, leaving adults with autism untrained or unprepared for employment. Fortunately, many employers are now beginning to advance their hiring of autistic adults, and they demonstrate that if given a chance, an adult with autism will be an outstanding employee. Oftentimes, the federal government reinforces the perception that individuals with autism, and for that matter, any developmental disability, can't work in meaningful jobs. In his State of the Union address, President Obama suggested a $10.10 minimum wage for workers paid through federal grants and contracts. But it is so common to underestimate and marginalize workers with a disability that they weren't originally part of this effort. Fortunately, many organizations, including the Autism Society, advocated for inclusion of individuals with a disability in that executive order. And we are proud that the President assured inclusion of workers with a disability. At the Autism Society, we believe that educational inclusion, employment opportunities, and equal participation in community life are civil rights. As in other civil rights struggles, our nation needs the moral conscience to embrace people with autism as different, not as less. The answers are not difficult. First, we must ensure that every government agency and body respects the value and dignity of each person living with autism, or for that matter, any disability. Secondly, we must ensure that if a government entity is charged with helping all people, it does so in a way that is inclusive of those with autism. We must also ensure that public educational institutions are held accountable for seeing that students with a disability are provided the same level of educational opportunities as those without a disability. We know that those few educational institutions that do provide a high commitment to opportunity for students with a disability are showing that with support, a student with a disability can be successful. A strong example is Marshall University in West Virginia, where Evan Badish, Evan's the son of our organization's president, with proper support and Evan's amazing desire and commitment to obtaining a quality education, he is succeeding. This is because the university, from its wonderful president, Dr. Stephen Kopp, to all of the faculty, are fully committed to ensuring that every student, regardless of their condition, can succeed. They see the value of such success, and they know it's the right thing to do. The Autism Society believes that we also must change the national discussion regarding autism from simply cause and cure to one of hope, acceptance, support, and opportunity. We can seek to improve the lives of people with autism without sending the message that they are not yet enough to be loved, valued, and accepted as they are. And finally, and we believe this is critical, we must focus our efforts through a private-public partnership that does not rely on government to do it all. I again want to commend Congressman Smith, who is working with us in addressing adult services in a way that assures maximum opportunities by advancing proven best practices through a public-private effort. People with autism deserve more than 4 minutes of the game. Real change that embraces them in the mainstream of our society will only come when we all work together. I thank you for your very important attention to this critical matter, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Husband, thank you. Husband, thank you very much for your testimony and for the perspective that you bring to this and the long advocacy of Autism Society of America. I've been involved since 1980, and I'll never forget when we had a game-changing moment in my district in Brick where we thought there was a prevalence spike, and I introduced a bill called the Assure Act, which is really the Combating Autism Act, almost all the identical parts of it with some tweaks ever since. And CDC and NIH were against it and thought it was a solution in search of a problem. I'll never forget it. It was really difficult to understand the lack of interest. Give an example, CDC spent $287,000 per year on their entire program. I mean, that doesn't buy a desk and one or two people, and I often ask them, what do you do? It took 3 years to get the bill passed. It was Title I of the Children's Health Act. And the reason why I mentioned it, Autism Society was instrumental throughout that whole process, gaining co-sponsors and educating members who, again, many of whom at the time, particularly in 97, 98, shared the view that this was extraordinarily rare. 3 in 10,000 was the number when I got elected, and a lot of us clung to that as, well, that must be the number. So thank you for that long-standing leadership. Mr. Rosenoff, we do have, I'm going to recognize you in a moment, but there's a vote on, a couple votes. We'll take a very brief recess, and I will several members have said they wanted to be here, and they will come, I'm sure. But this is, I think, an opportunity to round them up. Thank you. We're standing brief recess.
left mine.
The subcommittee will reconvene and continue its sitting, and I recognize Mr. Rosenoff.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to share Autism Speaks experience working with autism communities around the globe. My name is Michael Rosenoff. I'm the Associate Director of Public Health Research at Autism Speaks. Since 2007, I've managed the organization's epidemiology research portfolio. Research focused particularly on measuring the prevalence and economic costs of autism in the U.S. and worldwide. I'm also a member of the organization's International Scientific Development Team, helping lead Autism Speaks' Global Autism Public Health Initiative, currently active in over 50 countries around the world. I'm formally trained in public health and epidemiology and have a personal family connection to autism. Our mission at Autism Speaks is to change the future for all who struggle with autism spectrum disorders. This can mean funding scientific research for those families struggling to understand the causes of autism. It can mean developing strategies to help those struggling to overcome barriers that limit access to effective services, or it can mean providing support for those struggling to receive acceptance and opportunities to contribute to society. Because autism knows no ethnic, cultural, or geographic boundaries, neither does Autism Speaks. In 2007, the United Nations adopted a resolution recognizing April 2nd as an annual day of World Autism Awareness. In response to the increase in awareness worldwide, and with it the increased demand for information and support, Autism Speaks launched the Global Autism Public Health Initiative in 2008. The objective to develop sustainable, broad-reaching, and culturally sensitive programs that build local capacity for autism research and service delivery. This is accomplished through multi-directional knowledge transfer and multinational collaboration among diverse stakeholders. In just over 5 years, our international team has traveled more than 1 million miles and spoken with hundreds of affected individuals, parents, professionals, and government officials. Today, I would like to offer you some of our experiences and important lessons learned. The autism community is diverse, with a diverse set of challenges and a diverse set of strengths. As autism is a lifelong condition, those challenges and strengths often change over the course of time. Thus, there is no single one-size-fits-all solution to improving lives of those touched by autism. Autism is not simply a health issue, but also an educational issue, a social welfare issue, and a human rights issue. The most effective strategies are those that are comprehensive and multi-sectorial. For example, in developing a national strategy for autism in Bangladesh, the government established an interministerial task force to implement a coordinated plan of action across 8 government ministries, including health and education, also social welfare, labor, and even finance. Because to achieve a truly inclusive society, autism is as much a labor and finance issue to increase employment opportunities as it is an education issue to achieve inclusive education. Across countries, while cultures, belief systems, public health infrastructure, and resources may differ, all families around the world want the same for their loved ones with autism: improved awareness to reduce stigma, statistics to know they are not alone and to advocate for policies, increased access to evidence-based services earlier in life and throughout life, and more opportunities for individuals with autism to reach their fullest potential in life and society, especially after their caregivers are gone. Common goals mean that common approaches can be effective across diverse settings, which makes cross-country collaboration and idea sharing so important. Approaches do, however, need to be tailor-fit to different country contexts. What may be an effective strategy in one may not be feasible in another. Strategies must be adapted to fit the environment while maintaining their active ingredients. Today, the most practical and effective approach to increasing autism support is through community-based programs. The purpose of these programs is to relieve some of the demand placed on the few highly trained professionals in clinical settings by transferring skills and knowledge to members of the community such as health workers, teachers, and parents. To help create a package of care that is transferable, especially in low-resource settings, Autism Speaks has teamed up with the World Health Organization in developing an intervention guide and training program for the delivery of autism services by community health workers in non-specialized settings. The model is currently being used in Ethiopia as part of a project funded by Autism Speaks. And as a result of the initial success of the program, the Ministry of Health of Ethiopia has made autism and mental health in general national priorities. They are currently organizing a conference on the scaling up of mental health services in the country. The WHO and Autism Speaks are also exploring models for parent training in the delivery of autism interventions. These activities with the WHO were among those identified as priorities as part of an international consultation on autism. The first of its kind meeting in the history of the WHO took place in Geneva last September. More than 75 representatives from nearly 50 different international organizations participated. And among the most discussed and highly prioritized issues were community inclusion and adult employment. This comes as no surprise considering that based on current best estimates of autism prevalence, every year tens of thousands of children with autism become adults with autism. How are we preparing them for society, and is there adequate opportunity for them to pursue employment and independent or assisted living? In Geneva, we heard about innovative models for identifying unique talents of individuals with autism that would make them valuable assets to an employer. Two of those models came from Specialistern and SAP, both of whom you've heard from today. But there's nothing like seeing the success of models firsthand, models of community inclusion in practice. In Bangladesh, I visited a center for individuals with disabilities in a small rural community on the outskirts of the capital city, Dhaka. The community itself surrounding the center was unlike any I'd seen before. Well, it looked like other roads I'd seen elsewhere in Bangladesh, with small shops and markets selling clothing and groceries. The difference was that individuals with disabilities, including intellectual disabilities and autism, staffed all of the shops. Not only were these individuals learning employable skills such as counting money at the register, but they were bringing money into their community and, most importantly, raising awareness of disabilities. I also had the great fortune to travel to Lima to visit the Centro Ansalvan de Peru, or CASP. CASP is a center for individuals with different abilities, not disabilities. It first opened its doors over 30 years ago in a garage and now has hundreds of current students and past graduates. The curriculum is community-based, where 30% of services are delivered at CASP and 70% are delivered at home in real-world settings. Students learn real-world tasks needed to survive in a city environment, such as using mass transportation. That is a skill they will need to be able to get to and from a job. A goal for all students at CASP is to get a job. That's not just true for those with autism who are less severely affected. Even those with greater challenges often have or can learn skills that are attractive to employers. And these individuals can be successful in a career with the right support. Importantly, the staff at CASP works with members of the community, such as the bus drivers and employers, to educate them about autism, which in turn perpetuates a more inclusive society. In a resource-poor country like Peru, it's not uncommon for graduates of CASP to actually become the family breadwinners, earning enough money to help support the entire family. Why couldn't this model work elsewhere? This brings me to a lesson learned. We must not overlook that knowledge transfer goes both ways. We can learn as much as we can teach, if not more, by working with autism communities from around the world. Countries and regions with limited resources and professional capacity have been for years developing innovative solutions to overcome the gap in autism services and the challenges to community inclusion that we experience even here in the United States. In just the last few years, the pace of development for autism has accelerated rapidly and globally. A new United Nations General Assembly resolution adopted in December of 2012 increased the commitment and accountability of governments worldwide to address the social and economic challenges of autism. And following the WHO consultation, the World Health Assembly adopted a resolution that provides a framework for the enhancement of national health systems to include autism services. Many countries have since developed national autism action plans and passed autism legislation. For example, in Africa, the country of South Africa, for the first time, has a framework for mental health, including developmental disabilities and autism. And earlier this year, 14 African nations participated in an autism congress sponsored by Autism Speaks in Ghana, where the First Lady of Ghana and the Minister of Health of Tanzania committed to enacting change for the autism communities of their countries. Worldwide, governments are listening and the commitment is there. However, know-how and capacity are often not. The final lesson learned I would like to share today is that legislation does not necessarily translate into action. Many of the autism laws passed in recent months around the world are well-intentioned but lack the strategy and resources to implement properly. In some cases, poor execution leads to unsuccessful programs that may actually hurt the chances for future support. More concerning is that hope can turn to helplessness for members of the autism community under these conditions. In India, there have been inclusive education laws in effect for many years, yet true school inclusion has not been achieved. I just returned last week from a consultation in New Delhi with the World Bank, working with the disabilities and education communities to develop an improved strategy for inclusive education in India. It is clear that you cannot simply put children with autism into a classroom without properly training the teacher and educating the students. Furthermore, in a place like India, you cannot simply train a teacher only on autism when there are many other children with other disabilities that also have a right to inclusion. It is important that we consider working with and learning from other disability advocates as we aim for acceptance and inclusion for our loved ones with autism. Autism is a highly prevalent and highly costly condition to societies around the world. At least 1 in 68 children in the U.S. has an autism spectrum disorder, and research suggests that prevalence may be the same or higher elsewhere around the world. And a recent study estimated that the costs to U.S. society are $236 billion per year, with much of that cost due to adult residential care and loss of productivity for both caregivers and adults with autism, many of whom could be earning greater income. The time to act is now, and there are already models available that are improving access to services and promoting community inclusion around the world. By working together and learning from one another, we can change the future for all who struggle with autism worldwide. Thank you for your time, and thank you to the many families, professionals, and government officials who have welcomed Autism Speaks to their countries to learn from their experiences.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank the panel. I'm not a member of the subcommittee, but the chairman and I have worked together and on a number of important issues, including Safe Blood in Africa, which has been credited with helping millions live and have increased life chances, and on cord blood. But of late, over these last few years, working on neuroscience or brain-related illnesses, and we have launched legislation to create a global Alzheimer's fund. But today, we've joined together, and I'm co-sponsoring his legislation on autism. And this is some very important work. Now, Ron, in your testimony, you refer to, oh, he hasn't talked yet. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield. I want to hear his testimony. No, I'll wait until he testifies, and then I'll ask. Thank you.
How about that? Is that working? Thank you, Chairman Smith, and all the members that are here today on this busy day. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak in a forum like this. As many of you know, I've been in this town for some decades, usually on the other side of these various tables, walking around with my pad and my tape recorder, writing for the Wall Street Journal, writing 6 books now. This last book is my 6th. And seeing a town that is often locked in a kind of zero-sum conversation. One person's benefit is another person's loss. Pie is only so big. This is not one of those conversations, which gives me some hope. This is as close to a win-win as you usually get in a town like this. What we have here is a community that we are now increasingly identifying as folks who can lead their own paths. For every dollar we spend to help them, we know, if we look at Thorkel's model, we look at what SAP's doing, they will return many dollars in all the ways our economists love, in productivity, in independent life, and save extraordinary amounts of money that, frankly, they don't want us to spend any more than anyone does. In a tight federal budget, saying several $100 billion a year is money we do not have. We are at a point of inflection in this debate, which is why I am hopeful. I'm hopeful to hear what's being said at the table and what's being said from the dais, where elected representatives say, I get this. You know, I have been at this for a long time, and I've traveled the world during the last 20 years talking to people who have been left behind in urban America, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. And what I find with many of them, they are living a life that is context blind. Now, we know that term from our own kids. It's often said that autistic kids are context blind. Well, I say yes. In some ways, they're context deep. But the context that we reward, the one that's kind of the shared context, of picking up cues, of knowing who's where and where they sit, what they come to the table with, all that kind of social engagement context. I think we reward that too much. And we will find going forward that we are often better off embracing its counterpoint, which is difference, which is the deep well of variance and the deep power of distinction. You know, Many of those kids from Afghanistan and Pakistan, I sit with them, I'm like, the kid's unlettered. He's context blind, but he's improvisationally gifted. Born of survival, born of the ingenuity that comes from survival. And in Southeast Washington, where I reported for years, I found the same thing. I wrote about a kid, the stories that won the Pulitzer Prize. What does he do? He doesn't learn the basic block and tackle of education. His brain, and we know the brain is ever shaping itself, has not been shaped that way. He didn't get that shaping from an education system. So he's in a tough spot at Brown University, the one guy in a decade from his inner city school here, Ballou High School, to make it. He's caught. What does he do? He writes a 68-line epic poem on heterogeneous and homogeneous grouping. He has an affinity. This affinity, in terms of poetry and rap music, he finds a way to use that to dissect a complex issue of education. Now, I want to give that guy a prize. And society does too. What we're seeing is the one-size-fits-all model that rewards some traditional learners, folks who get the game and how it's played. Well, it's discarding too many people in a society that cannot afford to do that. We're throwing away too much human capital, possibility, and potential. And the canary in the coal mine, I think, is this population we're talking about today. Absolutely. They're exactly like us, just extreme versions. All right? Now, I know we want to say this is a terrible illness and a Holocaust. I felt that. My son is 23. We've been at it for 20 years. And there are times where you say it's a tragedy. But then over time, all of our kids have said, I wouldn't use that word, actually, because I can do some things. Look what I can do. If you just listen, and don't try to make me more like you, but help me be more like me in a nourished and supported way, I can show you stuff. And that's what happened in this story. Traveling the world, talking to the disenfranchised, sitting with them in mud huts, sitting with them caught in terrible circumstances of violence, often born of bigotry and violent tribalism. What do I find? In 1993, I find the most significantly disenfranchised person I've met is living in the bedroom on the second floor. It's my son. He's whacked with autism just shy of his 3rd birthday. Chatting away, late onset, they call it. I love you, let's get ice cream, where are my Ninja Turtles? At 2, and then we moved to Washington, where I became the senior national affairs writer for the Wall Street Journal. Big moment for the family, on our way up. Everything seemed just right. I was full of certainty and smugness, all working out. My mother was just so proud of me. And then we got whacked. And then Owen started to vanish. Late onset autism, usually between 18 and 36 months. He lost function. First he wouldn't look at us, then he wouldn't talk to us. Then he could not speak. The few hundred word, 2.5-year-old vocabulary ends up being one word a few months later. And then we heard the first word, regressive autism. Autism. We didn't know much about it. Now the chairman talks about pushing forward legislation in 1980. What did the public know of autism in 1980? Well, not very much. Even back then, there was talk of the refrigerator mothers. Well, in 1988, most of our education happens because most of us here saw Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman. That's mostly what we knew. Raymond Babbitt. And when we got that diagnosis, we said, there's no way my son is that guy. We embraced denial, which is a powerful force. Not one I recognize as powerful as it is back then. So here's the story as it unfolds. He loses speech. He is alone. The world is talking to him like Charlie Brown's teacher. What, Charlie Brown. He can't even hear the Charlie Brown. The one thing, though, that seems to give him comfort, the only thing, is the thing he loved before the onset of the autism, the Disney animated movies. I'm like, this can't be. I mean, not Disney. But yes, Disney. So what we did together as a family is the only thing we could do as a family. course, I have an older son, 2.5 years older than Owen. We watched the animated movies up in the upstairs bedroom of our Georgetown house not far from here. The only thing that seemed to give him comfort. Now, at this point, my son is murmuring gibberish. At this point, he's talking like baby talk because he's lost speech and he's back to the early antecedents of speech where babies murmur gibberish. And he's saying, juicervos, juicervos, juicervos. My wife thinks he wants more juice. Doesn't want the juice. But we're upstairs watching a movie called The Little Mermaid. Anyone here see that movie? Yeah. I see, yeah. The chairman has seen it, so I think everyone should raise their hand. We've all seen it. Yeah. There's the power of the chairmanship. And, you got it, yeah. No, you're on it, you know. And which character do you think King Triton is kind of your guy? That's your character? Yeah. I mean, I think it works. Yeah. Right. No, I mean, I don't know. I see you more, Mr. Chairman, as a sidekick that helps the hero fulfill his destiny. That's not Triton. That's a different character. More Sebastian. So, no, Sebastian's good. You'll just watch the movie. He's the one you want to be. So, we're watching the movie up in the bedroom, and it's the part where Ariel, the protagonist, wants to transform herself to become human. This mermaid, she must make a trade with the villain, the Sea Witch, who says, it won't cost you much, a trifle really, just your voice. Owen rewinds. You know, his motor function has collapsed, but except the rewind button. That's good. He rewinds it again. His brother says, Owen, just watch the movie. Rewind. And all of a sudden, Cornelia says to me, it's not juice. I said, what? It's not juice. It's just your voice. I grab Owen, silent for a year. He looks at me for the first time in a year and says, juicervos, juicervos, juicervos. This was our moment. We called it our Helen Keller, Annie Sullivan moment. Our specialist said, don't be so sure. This is called echolalia. They memorize sound. They don't know what the words mean. This is often the way we see this population. If they can't express it, it doesn't exist. If they can't show and tell of their emotions, we assume there are no emotions to offer. That's the way we used to think. It's changing. But this is 1994. And our therapist said, echolalia. I said, is that like what it sounds like? That's right. Like a parrot. That's right. We went through several years of this. Several years where he's murmuring lines from movies. What do we find to make this story come to its crest? So we find he memorized 20 Disney animated movies of sound alone. And if you threw him a line, he'd throw you back the next line. We spoke in Disney dialogue for years. I mean, because everything's in the 50 animated Disney movies and Snow White. I mean, what's not in there? So you just pick a scene. At the beginning, it was Jungle Book. I'm Baloo. I know the height thing doesn't really work, but, you know, I'm kind of goofy. My wife's Bagheera, the panther, protective. That worked. That's typecasting. His big brother is King Louie. And Owen, of course, is Mowgli. He throws you a line, you throw him back the next line. Over years, we became animated characters. And this is how he gets his speech back. Took a couple years, but it happened. And then he turns the hundreds of hours of memorized dialogue and lyrics into an emotional language all his own. Invented one. Inventing an emotional language. That's something that gets a big bell rung. Then he developed a life philosophy. And he writes a story at the end of the book, Life Animated, my book, which is his original story. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us a profound thing that many people know anecdotally at this table and society is learning by the hour. That these affinities, every kid's got one. Often they have several, but usually one more than others. They're like lifeboats for these kids. Over the many decades with autism, the view was wean them off it. It's perseverative, it's wheel in the ditch, it's obsessive. Definition of obsession: interest to the exclusion of all else. Well, that's the way they're built. They can't dance around like bees going flower to flower. They lock on. They're not foxes, they're hedgehogs. Again, they're like us, extreme versions of us. This is what we learn against our will. The years we locked the television set, because he was doing all-night movie marathons, and we were just going crazy. There are times we said, let's use it as a behavioral tool. If you want to watch your favorite video, here's 10 things you got to do, each like walking across hot coals. His behavior spiked a little improvement at school, but then trailed off. Like we had cut him off from his supply line. We tried everything. Until finally my wife, in her wisdom, says, respect his affinity. Enjoy it with him. Look, we can't try to fix him every minute. That's not a parent-child relationship. Not one that works. And then we got in the basement with him. And we danced. And we sang. And we played characters. And he knew we weren't going to pull the rug out from under him. That's the key. Because we see these affinities, and they can see we're impatient. And we know they're across the landscape. Some kids are into Disney, lots of Disney. I'd say the predominant one, frankly. But a lot are anime. There's Thomas the Tank Engine. There are maps. There are train schedules. A parent came to me the other day. She says, black and white movies from the 40s and 50s. I'm like, really? How old is he? He's 14. Okay, well, there's a lot to work with there. Get in there with him. Speak 40s black and white movies. Speak map. Speak Disney. Here's the key. What they learn and what my son learned in terms of basic education, general knowledge, it was vast. He learned to read by reading credits. Again, because that's the way he is, like us, only more so. That's the way we all are. The thing that fires us, our passion, it's always our pathway. It's not even like working. We learn to play the game in schools. Oh my God, I got to memorize this. When's the test? And I forget it the next morning. These kids are never going to learn that. They're not wired that way. Their reward circuitry doesn't work like that. Their passions are their pathways. So this is what we learn. And then the question is, what do we do? This is creating change in the community that is, in a way, overdue and oddly expected. People have been talking about this for years. There's a tipping point we're seeing now. What does it mean in terms of what we can do? Well, what it means is that we now have a clearer pathway that Thorkel and the other folks at this committee are seeing as well, to say, yes, got it. Exactly like us, only more so and less so. All right? How does that work? Well, the less so parts, to make them fit into systems of valuing human ability that we know are kind of one size fits all and don't work very well. Well, what we're doing there is measuring the less so's every day, trying to fix that part, and often ignoring the more so's. Again, exactly like us, it's the distribution that's the key. What are those more so parts? Hard to measure. Why should that surprise you? Faith, will, adrenaline, creativity, the best stuff is hardest to measure. It's our yardsticks that need to be changed. That's part of the discussion we had during the recess, all of us together. How do we change the yardsticks? What happens when you've got a one-size-fits-all yardstick that some kids succeed by managing and get that slot at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey? What do you do when that yardstick gets gold-plated? Even when we know it's bent. The mission of common purpose in this period is to offer a new set of yardsticks that actually reflect the way we are in terms of the diverse character of human beings. Is that going to be difficult? Of course. Is that something government could help with? Absolutely. But those yardsticks are crucial, because what happens going forward? Let me tell you what's happening right now in my crazy little shop up at Harvard. What we're doing is we're gathering affinities. We have folks coming to the lifeanimated.net website. The book's only out 3 months, but there's a kind of energy, a revolutionary pop that's occurring. We say, show me that affinity in a video. So we got the videos piling up. Everyone like Owen. Using the affinity, and one of the researchers at Yale, which I'll tell you about in a minute, says it's like the Enigma machine during World War II. They use the affinity to crack the code of the wider world. So what does it look like? We've got kids with all kinds of affinities showing their stuff on the website. That's one side of it. The other side of it, there's a team of neuroscientists that I'm working with since the publication of the book. MIT, Yale, Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University, folks at Duke, even some people at NIH, because Tom Insel is very psyched up about all of this. Here's what they're doing. They're bringing in communities of autistic spectrum kids at a young age. They're having them lock onto their affinity. And then they're doing the fMRI. Okay, here he's in his sweet spot. What's lighting up? Well, look at that. The reward circuitry's alight. Parts that deal with social cognition are firing. Actually, this shows in this fMRI his compensatory skills, because that's the key. Again, you're an expert in neuroscience. You know we're living in the era of neuroscience. What do we learn just in the last 15 years? Since those terrible, terrible moments where the epileptic kids had to have half their brain taken out, and everyone says, oh, that's awful. And then they said, geez, the remaining half's doing everything both halves used to do. How's this working? We thought the brain was static. We thought if it doesn't happen by the time you're 3 years old, it ain't going to happen. We're born with more cells as a baby than any known thing in the universe, and we shape them and discard them till we die. Wrong, all of it wrong. We're constantly shaping our brains every day. You guys probably shaped it this morning, frankly. We're growing cells, and the brain is constantly improvising to find new neural pathways. This is very hopeful. Because what do we find with our community that the neuroscientists are affirming? A traditional pathway may be blocked, stressed, by virtue of the hand they're dealt at birth. As they go out into the world and find their affinities, compensatory strengths are building. It's just high school science, conservation of energy. It goes somewhere. Where's it going? That's what the researchers at MIT, Yale, and Cambridge are there to find out. And once we begin to discover, which is the way this is moving now, and it's not just there, it's everywhere. Once we discover those compensatory muscles, we will start to say, fine, I can nourish that. I can support that. And that eventually is going to be something an employer says, oh, can I have one of them? Actually, 100 of them would do. What happens here? What happens is that we begin to tap enlightened self-interest. Look, you all know, as we all know, the only thing that works in a civil, free society, in a free enterprise model, as the founding fathers knew, is enlightened self-interest. We need to bring the enlightened here to this self-interest. And we'll do it working in unison. Researchers, government, industry, and frankly, folks like some of the folks at the panel here today who are pioneering new ways to see ourselves through this left behind population. This is what always changes the arc of history. The moment where the left behind population is seen as not them, but us. That's where we are now. So on the lifeanimated.net site, we have neuroscientists looking at the videos of extraordinary feats of these kids who are discarded. And they're saying, well, actually, that's a neural pathway, and that's a neurological strength, and this is something an industry wants. That's one side of it. Another side of it is we're setting up the affinity network, where these affinities are going to be displayed and scaffolded, again, with support, so that employers can say, there it is, and that is measured good. Can we have an exchange or conversation with that young adult? We'll manage that conversation. They're not going to be out there in the swift winds of public without support. Again, these are things that government might get involved with. It's just like eBay or Monster.com for special skills. It's the way the world works now. 2. 3, what I'm now doing in the past month and a half is meeting with folks out on the far and distant coast, folks who are building augmentative technologies and creating a generation of augmentative technologies that will be exactly the kind of supports that this population needs. There is no place in which the return on this investment will be greater, not just for the folks who want to jump in and invest, but more importantly for society at large. Because this is the era we're living in. Now, Owen sees it as a sidekick. He looks at Siri. He taps it on his iPhone. A couple months ago, he says, can I ask it anything? I said, what would you ask it? And he starts reeling off what he'd ask it. That helps him be context strong where he is often context blind. That's where we're going. This is something that is shared purpose. Again, not a zero-sum game, a win-win. That's happening as part of a synergistic group of activities. Let me just finish with this. These affinities create community. When I'm a kid and looking at the folks in the panel, when all of you were kids, we're lumpy middle-aged people are better. You couldn't find folks like you. Not so easy. You might have a club at high school. You might go to a place where they did something like the comic shop or whatever it is. Well, now we can find each other. It's one of the great miracles of the connected age. What's happening, we're finding, is that these affinities are forming communities. And once that happens, these kids don't feel alone. They don't feel broken. They feel strength in numbers. And they're like, we are all good at our thing. We're not less. This part, we're more. And this is what happens every week at Disney Club at my son's school. He started it when he got there 3 years ago, his college program in Cape Cod, because he wanted friends. He wanted people like him. What's fascinating and enlivening and hopeful is that many of the kids in Disney Club were not raised in this sort of crazy, ionized, animated character affinity therapy workshop that our house became. They were raised just like most kids. Some of them were told, cut off the affinity. It didn't vanish, and their passion did not diminish. When we get to Disney Club, it's like a dam break. The first Disney Club, they're watching Dumbo. Great movie. And of course, Cornelia and I, my wife, we've been talking Disney for years. This is easy for us. We say to the kids, talk to me about Dumbo. Why is this a favorite? One of the young ladies says, let me explain. This is a young girl who could not speak as a child. Many of the non-speaking kids bond with non-speaking characters early on that express all emotions without words. Why is that a surprise? She says, well, you see, the thing that made him different, his ears, made him an outcast. And I understand that from my own life. But then he learned through his life that what made him different allowed him to soar. This is the age we are in. This is a time where we can allow them to soar. And it will draw the best from us, not just as individuals, but as a society, to say in this time we rose to the occasion of making the arc bend. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ron, thank you very much. That was extraordinary bit of insight and sharing a personal history with you and your son, Owen. Thank you so much for that. I think one of the bottom lines that you've shared with us is that best practices also include the yardstick, as you put it, how we look at and view those on the spectrum, and that's a change that hopefully happens not just in Washington, but across all of corporate America and then throughout the entire world, which is one of the reasons why we're launching this whole aging out issue. Part of the CARES autism bill that's passed the House, is now pending in the Senate, is to get to the point of looking at what is available once you've aged out, housing, job opportunities, and we're hoping, and again, all of your testimonies were just extraordinary. I still, and I've tried for a long time now, can't get USAID to focus on autism. And so your testimonies would put right in Dr. Shah, who's a good man, who heads the administrator for USAID. CDC does some work overseas, but not enough from, or if any, from USAID. And your point, where was it, about the what you did, Mr. Rosenoff, in Ghana with the health minister and with the First Lady of Tanzania and Ghana, with 14 countries participating, plus your work with Ethiopia. I had a hearing where we had women and children and families talk about what was available, and we had a woman from Sierra Leone who talked about how in Sierra Leone, there was, Cote d'Ivoire, wasn't Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, there was nothing available for her son. And she was one of the lucky ones at the time that went to Ohio and then, received the full assistance of the state and the municipality that she lived in. So again, your testimonies are great. And I was in the Central Anne Sullivan de Peru, and saw, while we can share many best practices, we can also glean best practices from others. And I thought they had much to offer in Lima. It's a 30-year-old effort, and I was really impressed that I could tell you were too by your statement. I'd like to yield to my colleagues. I do have a couple of questions, but I yield to Chaka Fatah, and then go to my good friend from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The World Health Organization indicates that there are well over 1 billion people worldwide suffering from one of some 600 brain-related diseases or disorders or challenges. Autism is something that we've seen an increased prevalence of worldwide, and in our own country, something like 1 out of every 68 children somewhere on this spectrum. We got a gender situation where it's almost always a young boy. But I could just tell you the most hopeful thing I've heard is the testimony I just witnessed, Mr. Chairman, and it's quite empowering. So, and Tom Insel is someone who I deeply respect, and I know that the Institute has been quite focused on this issue, and I want to spend just a few minutes on this. So I had here on the Hill last week a young lady, Renee Gordon, whose son is an adult now, and has had a whole set of challenges. But to jump to the positive, now he's got a iPhone that he can speak through. It hangs around his neck. And to deal with the question of affinity is that she indicated that he knows every street in Washington, D.C. He can walk you through any museum because he's kind of just he's got this capacity, this strength that others of us don't have in terms of this. And it points to the work that you're doing around affinity, that it is true that where in every other description you would say that this young man was a low-functioning person, but in these particular areas, he functions beyond anyone else in terms of his ability. So there's something to be learned. I spent some time at Boston University at the Autism Excellence Center, and I was taken by the artwork done by young people. And there's so much that we can learn here, and I think you really have flipped this on its head from looking at it in one way to us looking at it in a much different way. And so, Mr. Chairman, on the other morning, on Tuesday, I spent the morning at DARPA, and they're doing some great work on neuroscience, and there are a lot of people throughout our government are doing important work. And I just hope that as we look at this question about autism, that we put it in a broader context. And I think about the gender bias. We see the same circumstances with schizophrenia. It's almost always a young male. And it's, it has certain, and I'm convinced that as we look at these things, that we're going to find solutions the broader we look and the deeper we look. And that's why, the mapping of the brain and some of the other things that are not disease or disorder specific, I think have a import in this effort, because we have some real runway room here. There's a lot for us to learn. We've learned a lot, but we have to do more. And we have to do it from a global perspective. And, the EU's efforts, Henry Markram, and the efforts in Israel with the Israeli brain technology, all around the world, people are working. And that's why I'm glad that as chair of the committee, you've taken this on to kind of look at it from a global context. So I thank you, and I thank you for all of your testimony. I read it before we were over on the floor, so I wanted to jump the gun before you. I didn't know you hadn't testified. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Meehan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think all of you inspire us as well with not only your your persistence, and I think that's the kind of a thing that I have the joy of living next to a neighbor with a young child, and we have the joy of watching him grow. But I watch the parents too, and it's a remarkable thing to see. And I know it's not always easy, but working not just to survive, but to develop these into this next place is really what I think is so special about this hearing. Let me start first, and I'm struck by your Mr. Susskind, your talks about the affinities and the identification of places. But Mr. Velasco, you similarly use that same language, and if you could talk about your experience where you discuss the idea that so often those who have autism and have a lot of other coping capacities and skills to bring never get through the first interview once they disclose something. And so they're constantly in the same vein in which you've identified it. They seem to be ready to go, and then they get knocked down by us. And yet here you are taking the time to say, wait a second, let us find this affinity. And in fact, you're finding workers that in many ways are superior. And that's sort of a breakthrough if only we're able to channel this understanding and have others begin to appreciate the opportunity that exists in this very special. So would you share with me your experiences, whether this experiment has met your expectations or perhaps even exceeded them? And I'm particularly interested in how you focus on that particular strength that you're able to develop.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to share once more our experience with the Autism at Work program. George Brown is one of our new employees. George is early 40s in age, and he allowed me to share his experiences with you and with this panel and members of the audience. Just yesterday, he sent me an email, and he said, for many years, I went through the interview process only to be rejected over and over again. I would take this skill or that skill that they asked me to learn. I would take or acquire this certification or that certification that they asked me to acquire to be marketable and employable. I went to college because they told me I needed a college degree, and at the end, he said, I was still being rejected. I suffer, he said, from deep depression because I continue to be rejected. What I find in Mr. Brown is a tremendous resiliency, of course, because he's been through this for many, many years. I found this passion for the work that he does at SAP to be inspiring to a lot of people. His testimony as a worker, I think, is unparalleled. He is as involved as any of the other 12 new colleagues that we have here at SAP. Does he have the capabilities that we're looking for? Absolutely. George has a degree in business administration with a specialization in management of information systems. So from purely a skill perspective, he has what we need in the organization. Aligned as well with the enthusiasm, of course, that we are seeing in his day-to-day activities with the company. We also have other people like Janice Oberman. Janice is 56 years old, and Janice was unemployed from the year 2000 until 2014, approximately. She has a master's degree, and she's an undergraduate with a degree from the University of California at Berkeley. She was diagnosed with autism late in her age. She is a software tester, quality assurance in the business products that we sell to our customers. And what we're finding is that, again, the capabilities are there, the ability is there, the desire to work is there, but it is just the other side of the table oftentimes that doesn't have the capability to understand and harvest that talent. I believe that as organizations start maturing and learning that there's this pervasive skill out in the market, and as we start seeing that there is an enormous amount of job openings out there in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that is, something is not working right when you find that there's people that are unemployed, underemployed, or partially employed who deserve a better shot. Our expectation at SAP is that those capabilities that we're seeing at work right now will pay off in the long term, in the short term as well, but in the long term in retention practices as well. Because the cost associated for companies like ours to replace an employee go as much as 150% of the annual salary of the person being replaced. Now, if you have an attrition rate or a turnover rate in a company of 10 to 15%, which is typical in many software companies, replacement costs are a huge loss of money for the organization. So we're seeing not only the scale acquisition, but also the retention of the employees as something of extreme value. And so far, what we're seeing in our employees, again, is that resiliency, that intense desire to work, to come up to work every day and contribute as being, an enormous driver and inspiration for the rest of us in the organization.
Well, I thank you for that commitment, and I hope that you will, as you further unlock this secret and build the record for these successes, that you won't be worried that your colleagues at some of these other technology companies will catch up with you, that you'll take that information and allow it to be shared so that others won't be afraid to explore the possibilities and develop the potential. And I think, Mr. Susskind, you really developed this concept in the testimony, which I found so intriguing. And I had an experience. Garnet Valley High School in my area is working in a very proactive way with really two groups, which is kind of neat. The juniors and seniors are being taught robotics and how to do the process of manufacturing and operation. The children in the grammar school, I watched the robot, and it sits and speaks and talks to them. And the teacher said that, when I talk to them, you can see the 7 children around, and the engagement was, they knew the teacher, they were comfortable. There was a little more action with us in the room, there was this sort of, management of the orchestra that was still warming up. Mm. But when they put the robot on, the children just came in, and they engaged in a way that I had never seen before. And they were sort of enjoying this concept that they're breaking through to something. Seems to me they're onto this concept that you were discussing with it. Tell me a little bit more about how we discover this in more ways. And certainly we know about the spectrum. There's really remarkably talented folks with a few issues, and there's some that are really struggling, as you said, to even say a word or tie a shoe. Or do we find that same possibility on the full spectrum?
We do. It's interesting because I arrived at this, Congressman, with what I call the same usual set of neurotypical prejudices and blind spots. I don't even know what the word neurotypical means anymore. Frankly, this whole experience has helped me look at myself and people I know with new eyes. We're probably all, in some years, hence this will be discovered, we're probably all a mixture of many spectrums, many bands of color in the human rainbow. We have concentrations here and, less concentrations there. I think that's the reality that we're all now seeing, in some ways for the first time. What you're seeing now, though, are people recognizing that many of the ways we measure human capacity, i.e. expressive speech, well, it doesn't track with underlying cognition. I know many, many kids with an inability to speak. About 40% of the folks on the autism spectrum have little or no speech. They have now a new buffet, but they need more, frankly, here, of augmentative devices where they type. I have a friend whose son types 180 words a minute, quite beautifully, grammatically perfect. The kid's got real talent. He cannot talk to you. But what he's doing is he's processing the world, again, through his powerful muscle, his Enigma machine. And he's breaking codes every day. Part of what you find, though, what you're talking about, this robot, is that what I think many of the researchers have found is that when there is something that is a verisimilitude of reality, but a little off to the side, which is a little bit what this community does. They create an alternative alongside reality that kind of works. It grabs them. It draws them in. I mean, right now, and you can go online and see this, someone I know up at MIT, Cynthia Brazil, who is the robotics chief up at MIT, has created this robot, Jibo. And this thing is a desktop robot that does very much what you're talking about. And it's quite enlivening. And you can see how it draws in neurotypical people. But for the spectrum community, this could be a pathway to joy. I mean, for instance, I can see Owen. Owen and I watched this Cynthia's video not too long ago. And he's like, wow. So I could have the robot do all kinds of stuff. I said, yeah. I could have it play a video. And I could talk to it in the well, we can't do that's another company, Toy Talk, where you can talk to the video and it talks back. I mean, this is where we're going. We are all becoming kind of a version of cyborg here. We are all augmented by a new generation of technologies. And what's interesting is that it goes not just to this community, but how this community is a canary in the coal mine, showing us ourselves more clearly as to what the future might look like. This is where enlightened self-interest gets involved. You know, in some ways, they're the R&D lab for what will be working for the rest of us. It's not just the app we're building. Everyone's going to want the app because, look, I could use that too. Developing context as I walk through the world. It's more than that. It's that the neuroscientists, as the congressman understands, and anyone who deals with neuroscience, is that Eric Kandel says it best. Understanding autism means we'll understand the human brain. Why? Because it's odd and fascinating in the way it opens a window to seeing the brain in its more so and less so concentrations. So that means not just the areas that are challenged. That means neuroscientists are saying, well, look at the more so parts. Can my brain do that? That is where we see possible futures where this community will start to lead. This is the sweet spot. And part of what we could do together is to support the programs that alter perspectives and the framing of the debate. I mean, once that happens, much of this will carry itself forward. But that's kind of where we are right now, is to say, how can I help people see what the underlying science shows and what many people on the panel here know from long, hard-earned experience. Once that happens, this room grows, this table multiplies, and people start saying, this is not about them because they are us. This is about how through them we all move forward and we're all better off. That's where change occurs.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the courtesy of being able to be with you here today, and I really want to thank the panel for their tremendous
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll just ask a few final questions, and again, your testimonies will be disseminated very widely as soon as we get the full record together. So thank you for that. And your points have been brilliant. I think you've focused on different things. I think the idea of looking at this, from a way that we have not done before is greatly required to move forward and to make advancements. Talking about enlightened self-interest, how do we go about getting the CEOs, the hiring specialists in companies to really recognize, the jewel that awaits them if they hire a person on the spectrum?
Congressman Meehan had a really good point, and that was precisely in that direction. How do we make it happen? And I think that sharing is a key element of that. What we have done at SAP is we have opened up a number of venues for other employees to come and visit with us. We share what we have the minute that we have it available. So as soon as we are wrapping up our pilot programs, we are in a position to share our learnings. We've had up to now approximately 15 companies who have approached us, very large companies, very committed companies. One of them just told us last week that they had received final approval for their own Autism at Work program, which is
Are you
extremely...
at liberty to say who they are, or at least some of them?
Yes, the name is Capital One.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, if I could, while you're answering that question, maybe you could elaborate too a little bit, being from Denmark and with your European background, on how the Europeans are doing on this. And another question for all, and Ms. Hussman, you might want to touch on this as well. If 50,000 American children are matriculating into adulthood every year, what are the numbers around the world? Are they along the same demographic, or has it lagged, or what in other parts of the world? And how many do we see, you know, of the 70 million, how many of those are becoming adults?
Well, I have 10 years of experience from Denmark, and we still have employees with autism working at the first corporate clients we had in Denmark. So it says something about retention and resilience. What I experience here in the US is that there's huge interest in focusing on talent here, and I think I relocated to Delaware because Governor McKell, he said, I'll get the stakeholders together. We have a lot of high-tech jobs that are vacant. We have more and more people being diagnosed. So he chaired the meetings and showed political leadership that now has resulted in Delaware being our base for the US. And I think what it takes for the corporate sector to really request these people, because we have to turn from a push to a pull. We have to have companies like SAP doing the storytelling. But Specialisterne is also a case study at Harvard Business School, because we manage what they call the outliers. And they claim that the winners in the global knowledge-based market economy will be the companies who are best at managing outliers, because that's where innovation come from. And in the latest issue of MIT Sloan Management Review, there's a story about the dandelion philosophy of how to see always the herb angle instead of the weak angle to the dandelion. And this is also what we've been discussing here today. Instead of looking at the deficits, let's park that and let's see the strengths. And I think the time is on our side, because there are so many vacant jobs in the STEM sector, in the high-tech sector. And thanks to stories like from SAP, we can get the companies to really say, wow, we missed something here. Let's follow the SAP example. But there are also many who, with autism, who do not qualify for the high-tech jobs. But then there's the 503, the new rule saying that 7% of people with disabilities should be working for you if you want federal tasks. So that can really broaden the spectrum, not just for the high-end part of the spectrum, but we can really have the opportunity to make Janice and George show the way, open the doors from the companies, and then get as much talent among people with autism and similar challenges, because there are many others who have challenges similar to autism, and we have to remember them. And hopefully we can get the people with autism, open the door for people who have other challenges but have a lot of talent and capacity, if the employers will accommodate for that. And I really follow Ron's example of the canary in the mindset, because I claim that a workplace where our people thrive will be a good place to work for everyone. Thank you.
Ms. Hussman, before you, I thought you really, your testimony was excellent, but your point that the lack of our nation's attention to fully integrate those living with autism into mainstream society, then you make a very important point, which was created, frankly, by the ADA, through universal access is often expected of buildings and stairways. Our society is yet to build universal access into schools, curricula, workplaces, our hearts, or our minds. I mean, that was, if you could, again, answer the original question, but I think that point was very well taken.
Yeah, so one of my concerns in the dialogue here, or my experience in the dialogue here, is Mr. Susskind gave the percentage of 40% are nonverbal or partially verbal, and so when we talk about the high skill jobs, there's also we need to be coming at this from both. Actually, the logistics of the table works out well from both ends. What you'll notice in many of the stories is that it took time, patience, and support from many of the positive stories that you're hearing, and a lot of hours of a lot of parents. And what we need is to shift that, not just from the parents, but to society as a whole when we talk about changing our minds and making the ADA bigger than our stairways and our doorways, is to say that our teachers, who you have to pick special ed to get any training on autism or anything else. But I would defy you to walk into any American classroom today and not find someone with a learning disability, someone on the spectrum, somebody who needs different supports. And so our curricula for our teachers alone could significantly change the landscape of people's perceptions when somebody comes to you for a job, or somebody comes to you for some other opportunity, or tries out for a team. So I'm not sure that I answered your question, but.
Before you go, the worldwide demographic, again, moving into the adulthood stage, is it pretty much universal around the globe, or is it just...
So, Mr. Congressman, I can offer some comment there about the numbers. Really, the 50,000 children transitioning to adulthood each year is a number that's derived from the U.S. prevalence estimate of about 1%. We need to keep in mind that prevalence estimate is among children. Our best estimates of prevalence around the world are about the same, around 1%. So yes, we can think about it in terms of similar numbers. I can tell you from experience and meeting with families around the world that this aging out issue, this transition to adulthood issue, is a major one, and one that is on many people's minds. But the point I want to come back to, and I think the important point that we shouldn't forget, is that we really don't know how many adults there are with autism in the United States and around the world. Again, the prevalence estimates are based on children. We have an estimate that about 1% of adults have autism. If that's the case, then there are more adults today with autism than children with autism. But I think it's important to remember that many of these adults may not have formal diagnoses. They may be in different sectors of society. Some may be comfortable and contributing to society, but with challenges that I think could benefit from, more attention given to these individuals. We need to, keep that in mind when structuring these programs. Maybe they should not necessarily. An individual may not necessarily have to have a diagnosis, with the consideration that they may have autism and just may not have a diagnosis yet. So improving our ability to identify adults with autism will help us better help them overcome their challenges and again find those opportunities to contribute to society.
Briefly, in your testimony, you talked about 14 African nations that you were a part of, and the First Lady of Ghana and the Minister of Tanzania. What has come of that? Did they come up with an action plan? Was there a follow-up to it?
This is really a first of its kind type of a meeting where the idea was to bring together advocates, various stakeholders from African countries to share their experiences. This was an opportunity to demonstrate that there are similar challenges across countries, and even though there may be differences in culture and resources, there are common challenges that then allow for common opportunities to work together, to collaborate, and to develop these types of solutions. So really this was a first chance for various groups around the African continent to come together and think about an African autism network, where the idea would be to develop strategies to raise awareness of autism across the continent, but also build capacity for services and research.
Mr. Sullivan, you had mentioned autism in Africa in your testimony, and mentioned in Nigeria has one adult psychiatrist serving the needs over 1 million people. The disproportionality of specialists and professionals to the number of people who are affected. I'm working on a case now with Cure Africa, Cure, it's just called Cure, where they're trying to help spina bifida children, especially those who get it from an infection base. And they have cured 5,000 kids in Uganda through a simple, non-stunt related, no stunts are needed, shunts I should say. And I went there and watched it, so did Greg. We saw and we actually had one of the trained neurosurgeons come over and testify. He did it by Skype, so we saw him over there. And the idea is to build out some capacity of 100 neurosurgeons over time. We are also trying to get USAID to focus on that, and thus far have failed miserably. But that said, it seems to me that there's a similar type of lack of capacity. And if you don't have the skilled personnel, you can have absolutely committed parents, but they also need that specialist insight and diagnosis in the first place. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a matter of if we can make the pull from the companies in Nigeria and other African countries, then I'm sure that companies like SAP, they know what they are looking for. And as we discussed, there are many adults with autism, probably the majority, who do not have a diagnosis, but have the same traits and have the same talents that the companies are looking for. And I think when companies have learned from our experiences and SAP's leadership here, they will create environments where people with autism thrives, but also people who are not diagnosed with autism will thrive. And I think that will be a magnet. I think it will be known in the community that maybe, well, you will know if you have challenges in social interactions and teamwork, but you're really good at math, physics, IT, chess player type. So you would know that SAP, for example, would be a good place to go for you to work. And I think my ultimate goal is really where we can take autism out of our equation and say, this is not just about autism, this is about good management, and this is about giving companies access to talent and help the companies find that talent and describe the shape it comes in. And many will have a diagnosis, many will not. But I think if the pull is there from the companies, if we can empower the energy in the families, turn that into social entrepreneurship, work with stakeholders, then you will not need an autism diagnosis in order to get into thrive in a program like at SAP.
Let me just ask, maybe SAP or either of you could answer this, or anyone. Most people get, not most, a large number of people get jobs first as interns. My legislative director just walked in, Kate Benedetti. She first started as an intern, and we got to know her, got to see her work product, and then Mary Nunes, our chief of staff, decided to hire her. Is there any kind of consideration being given in SAP or in this model that would bring in some of the students before they cross over to the adulthood?
This is an incredibly important topic. The issue of transitions, and transitions happen all the way from high school to college, and for those who go through college to professional life. One of the things that we see is that people in the spectrum, after they graduate from college, the ones that are able to finish a junior college or a college degree, oftentimes drop, and they have a 2 or 3 year cliff, where they are unemployed. And this is where they start asking themselves, why can't I find a position, a job? There's something wrong with me, right? So it is it impacts people quite a bit. What we're doing right now is exploring the possibility of an internship platform at the company, allowing people to come in the junior year. This is still on the design phase, but it is something that we have our eyes set on. We believe that we need to capture talent early on, okay, before they graduate, people with the degrees or the education that we're looking for. And the idea is that we would introduce this process hopefully within the next year.
Yes, what we're doing right now is we have this assessment training onboarding model. We are building bridges between people with autism and companies like SAP, but we want to remove the divide, and we can do that if we can work with the education system and the companies to have more crossover, to have the role models from the companies being involved in the school system, and to have the students being in internships. We have a youth education in Denmark where we do a lot of that. They are in internships at our corporate partners. We treat life skills as well, because this is more important than what we are doing now. If we can work with the education system, we will hopefully be able to remove the divide, and inspired by a new way of thinking talents, and to teach the companies new ways of management, then we can remove the divide that's there today.
Mr. Tuskin, you were
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting you talk about these models of, in a way, exposure. You know, there's lots of suspicion and confusion, and then they sit with the spectrum kid, the young adult, and they're like, huh, not what I thought. That's what the internship platforms are doing. You guys you're leading that charge. That's something that should be happening everywhere. I mean, look, every kid these days starts with an internship. No one's getting paid, you know, before they're 24. So that's an opportunity for these kids to not be different, also being interns. That's one thing. The second thing that I thought was interesting a minute ago when you were talking about models that work in Africa is that, you know, I'm an old enough guy that I remember talk of the new federalism back when, that states would be labs for programs, and the federal government would pass it to the states to figure out what works best. Well, now we're in a global experimental model that countries that lead here will be demonstration models for what works. And you may find surprise as to some countries that you would not expect to be leading that take the lead. I consider this, when I think of incentives, which is much of what we talked about today, a kind of incentive for a country, maybe in Africa, who gets put way down the list of possibility, says we have been able to shape something that can be used as a model for others. You know, a big challenge here that we've talked about in different ways all day is something that I deal with at Harvard when I talk about narrative. It's about reframing the narrative. We all make sense of our world and ourselves through stories. Our kids, of course, do it very dramatically. And, you know, we talk about a lot of the math science kids that, of course, you guys have embraced. Well, I'm spending time with kind of TED Talk for the humanities. Lots of kids who work and live inside of stories and develop stories. Well, they get this. They get this in ways that even we don't. And that's a big part of what's so positive about this. Again, extreme versions of us that often reveal our capacities back to ourselves. That's a golden point here. And in this case, they make sense of their life and their world through story. And the story here is reshaping, but it needs to be reshaped with a kind of solidity of purpose to give the employers the yardsticks, the tools they need, so they have no excuse. So they say, okay, I got the data now. Okay, I've got this yardstick which measures this array, this buffet of compensatory skills. Now I have no excuse. And in fact, I now have what you talked about, Thorkel, before. I have comfort in my corporate thinking where I want to reduce risk and I want to optimize potential and profit. That's the way companies think. Well, when they get those yardsticks to show capacity, again, in this wide range, this arc of many types of intelligence, it gives them comfort on the risk side. It also gives them hope on the profit side. That's the only thing that will work here. And part of what we can do here is give them the tools, the supports, so that those corporate decisions will be the decisions that ultimately carry forward not just the individual good, but the wider self-interest of society. And I think it's within reach.
Chairman, if I could, back on the numbers in other countries. We are, in two cases, we have some schools in Asia and Thailand and Burma, and we also have a grant with the Carter Center in Liberia where they are specifically addressing mental health as an umbrella. And the approach is to educate. The further out you get from urban areas, it is just that. It's just an umbrella of mental health. If you have epilepsy, they believe that you are mentally ill, and and you will be chained until you work through your seizures. And so when we talk about the numbers, I think that until we get to a place of education, that there are specific disorders underneath of it. And in Asia, we're finding we sent our son, and there too, you found that it's just, in the society that's so tough just to get through the day, that there's just a label of a mental disorder. And our son was able to say, well, no, I think he has autism, because he's familiar with it. And if I could just make one other point for the day, is that when we talk about the 40% nonverbal, when we talk about the progress and the skills, that it's not always just an economic benefit that these kids bring to our society. And so that's the whole spectrum that we're talking about, that sometimes just bringing society's ability to recognize the value in ourselves at a better level, it has got some economic benefit to it as well, even if they're not.
Creates a more humane
yes,
civilization,
yes,
doesn't it?
yes.
Beautifully put.
Beautiful.
Unfortunately, there's a vote on, and it's at 0, so I'm going to have to dart off. Thank you so very much. This is part of a series of important opening. We've had 3 hearings on global autism, but this one has a very specific focus on the aging out issue, and all of your testimonies were extraordinary, and I think will enlighten the Congress. It certainly enlightened me. Thank you.